Why do people proxy miniatures in wargaming? To save a few quid in an expensive hobby? To play with profiles that aren't currently in production or have never been manufactured at all? Or maybe you just aren't keen on the look of an army? I try to support the hobby where I can, but I'm also a firm believer in that it's your time and your money and you can spend it however you like, particularly if you're playing the game at home with your friends. I'm Joe from Windrush Wargamers, and here is part 2 of our proxy suggestions looking at Middle-earth strategy battle game Evil Factions. Check out the first video covering the good factions if you haven't already. Just a quick point on scale before we get into this one. Some of the suggestions may seem like the scale is slightly off, but if you look, the official models themselves have a variety of different scales, so it will depend on your individual preferences and tolerance for how things look on the tabletop. But without further ado, let's get into it. Our first entry is perhaps the most justified one. Farharad is a very unique faction for SBG, but Games Workshop currently don't stock their infantry or cavalry options, and haven't done for some time. This has led to the prices for Merkwood to reaching a frightening peak on eBay. The miniatures borrow from many tribal cultures around the world, and the sculptors clearly gave them a wicker fetish. Because of these details, you might need to do some personalization, but as a base, we will need some tribesmen. A good place to start might be the Frostgrave Archipelago Tribals box. For £20 you get 20 miniatures. This gives you a great many options, including all of the weapon options that the Urukai Warriors can sport. The possible downside to using the Frostgrave Archipelago Tribals are the seeming lack of poses, with only 5 different body options. The poses might get a bit stagnant if you use too many of them. Also, some of the weapons are kind of freakishly large. The Archipelago Tribals are a good start as they look nice, but there are other options out there. There's a host of miniature lines that support many types of tribal warriors at an even better price than the Frostgrave Archipelago Tribals. I have some experience in this, as I used 2 sets of Perry miniatures line to kit bash some Merkwood for myself. The project isn't finished yet, but I completed a few to show as examples. I achieved this look by combining elements of the Sudanese Tribesmen and Zulu Warriors kit. They both work out to be around 50 pence per model, so are super cheap, and both kits offer loads of poses. The Sudanese have plenty of bold heads, which is fortunate because most of them are baldies. The Zulu kit offers clubs, spears and cowhide shields. The shields are a similar shape to the Merkwood ones, but they're made of a different material. By blending these kits together you can get the best of both worlds. The only converting I needed to do after that was to sculpt some wicker collars. You also might be missing some blowpipes if you wanted them, but they can easily be converted by trimming down clubs and spears. Now, I'm sure when I mentioned Farharad, some of you instantly thought of the camels. These mad lads are absolutely brutal on the charge, but like their infantry buddies, they've been absent from production for quite a while. I'm not 100% sure on the price, but I think they'd be around £8.20 per camel. Again, my pick is the Perry Miniatures Sudanese line. They got 3 camels with riders for just £9. If you were happy with the Sudanese look, you could leave them right there, but I've knocked up a couple of examples with some converted lances and tusks to represent the Impaler special rule, and added a few trophy racks to see how they could look. Overall, I'm really excited about this project. I think I was able to represent the Merkwood Warriors and Raiders quite well, and I can't wait to finish it. I would like some official minis to pad out my force, especially the King, who looks based. Moving on now to our next entry, the Denizens of Merkwood. These creepy crawlies represent the decay of Greenwood the Great. You can field the relatively cheap plastic fell wargs, but some of the metal and resin miniatures might get a bit pricey. Let's kick things off with the Spider Queen. For £30 you can bag yourself a big arachnid herself and her 3 little broodlings. Her pose really divides people, as far as I can tell. The legs don't look natural, they look like they're stuck together. Fortunately, there are plenty of giant spiders in a similar scale. If you grab yourself this one from Knowles or Miniatures with the eggs, then grab these spider swarms, you can combine it at around half the price of the Spider Queen and her broodling. There's loads of spiders online, so have a look around, do a bit of research and see if you can find a better deal. Next, we'll move on to some troops. The spiders are 4 for £30. For this you get 2 giant spiders and 2 of the larger Merkwood spiders. This obviously means that if you want to field a large cohort of these 8-legged freaks, it will cost you an arm and a leg. My pick would be the Wargames Atlantic Giant Spiders. This kit is £25 and will give you 24 creepy crawlies, 12 large and 12 smaller. They may need a bit of work. The legs on the larger ones could be a bit longer, for example, so they more closely resemble the legs of Merkwood spiders. But the kit comes with some spare legs, so you could elongate them if you wanted to. Are a little bit smaller than the giant spiders in the Middle Earth range, but with a built-up base, they can still appear quite imposing. Alternatively, if the size really did put you off, Reaper Bones miniatures do make some which are a lot more comparable in size. Carnd is up next. Carnd have a very grounded look. They clearly borrow from many medieval cultures from the Far East. The miniatures look great, but they are all metal, so they could prove too expensive at times. Firstly, we can see that all the models are sporting sashimonos, otherwise known as back flags to you and me. Perry Miniatures sell tall sashimonos at £7.50 for 24 of them. Depending on how large your force is, you could use 1, perhaps 2 at a push of these. Looking at the style of dress, I think that out of all the medieval cultures, the Games Workshop depictions of the Carndis peoples most represent the medieval Koreans. Fortunately, Perry Miniatures have a wide selection of miniatures that match this look quite closely. One aspect of the Carndis foot warriors that makes them quite difficult is their weapon choices. All warriors are armed with daggers, hand-and-a-half axes, and bows, which is a weird combination. You don't always see those together, particularly in the Perry Miniatures line. But I would pick Korean heavy infantry with Glaive. The Glaive could easily be used as a two-handed axe if you trimmed it down slightly. It is a large cutting weapon, to be fair. At £7.50 for 6, this basically works out at half the price of the Carndis Warriors. They also have Korean archers for the same price. Now, as you would be making a saving, you could use some of that spare money to invest in some actual axes, but I think the Glaives work quite well anyway. The Carndis Riders are a similar story. Games Workshop sell them for £20 for 2. Perry Miniatures, on the other hand, have Korean armoured cavalry with bows and or two-handed weapons like the Glaive, for about 3 for £9. This works out to be roughly 1/3 of the price of Games Workshop, so an even better saving than the infantry. Now we come to the most unique unit in the Carndis faction, the Chariots. These look like a lot of fun to play, but they can be quite costly. The King's Chariot is £21.50, and a Charioteer by himself is £17. The Chariots themselves look really nice. They're quite plain, with a single rider and 2 horses. I did quite a lot of research into 28mm Chariots, but I think I've found a better alternative, but it requires a bit of shopping around. These foreground Chariots are £7.20 for 2. They offer a very simplistic single-person chariot, and you'd need 3 of these for my plan. Next, you'll need something to pull those chariots. Step horses from Fireforge Games are a good choice. You'll get 6 for £10, and you'll need 2 of these packs for this plan. So we have the chariots and the horses, now we just need some riders. Perry Miniatures Korean command sets are perfect for this in my opinion. They have some vanilla looking fellows and some more extravagant guys which could be used to stand in for kings. Also, it comes with a few banners so you can pimp out the King's Chariot like the Games Workshop one. And best of all, if my math is correct, then 6 of these chariots altogether will be £8.18 per chariot, which is half the price of the Games Workshop chariots. The whole of Azog's Legion could deserve its own video. They're either fail cast or forge wheeled resin kits that are quite costly. But I don't want to get bogged down in one army, so I'll focus on the main offender, the fine cast Gundam Warband. £40 for 12 miniatures could put off a lot of people. Also, the kit only comes with 6 poses, so if you bought multiple, they'd get very stale very quickly on the tabletop. So let's examine their look and see what we can get. The look is of course based off the Hobbit films, with legions of big dudes in segmented plate breastplates in a vaguely muscular shape, accompanied by unnecessarily goofy helmets. Sticking with Games Workshop, a good place to proxy right off the bat would be the Urukai Warriors. They are strikingly similar looking, with the same breastplates. If you trim the pikes down to spear length and paint them with pale skin, the only thing you'd be missing are the helmets, which, as we've established, probably isn't a bad thing. And at 1/3 the price of their northern cousins, you'd be quids in. Another pick for this could be the Orc Warriors from Norba Miniatures. They aren't a million miles away from the Gundam Orcs, and like the Uruks, they're about 1/3 of the price. I would personally be tempted to kit bash the two kits together to diversify the poses. Moving on to everyone's favourite pirate faction now, the Corsairs of Umbar. The bulk of this force is covered by the standard box of Corsairs. This plastic set is reasonably priced and looks great, but the issues with this faction arise with the elite troop options. The Arbalistas are £8.20 for 3, which can be costly when you consider that you might need quite a few. And the Corsair Reavers, who specifically carry 2 swords, have never been made at all by Games Workshop. I was originally going to suggest kits like the Crewman from the Frostgrave Archipelago, but honestly, I think that these elite choices can be taken care of with just one box. On the surface, this may seem like a bit of a rogue choice, so buckle up swashbuckler, we're going in. The Argencourt French Infantry from Perry Miniatures. The kit gives you everything you need to convert your standard Corsair box into Reavers and Arbalistas. £20 will give you 12 crossbows, 28 swords, and a whole bunch of extras for your bits box, including the warriors. Most of the weapons come connected to hands and even full arms. This means that if you aren't particularly comfortable with conversions, this could be a good place to start. With a simple weapon swap, you can easily make these guys look like they're elite choices. Another tip would be to use this kit to convert up some bosuns and Corsair captains, as the kit comes with many two-handed axes. Seeing as we've sorted out the other elite options, let's take a stab at the Black Numenoreans too, shall we? The Black Numenoreans are sinister looking, dark robed, heavily armoured evil boys, sold at £16 for 4 when they're available. This kit has divided many fans of the hobby, with some liking the more fantastical look with the large helms and the shoulder spikes, but others think the look is too much of a departure from the more grounded fantasy of. I've often wondered why exactly they look so different to their mounted counterparts, the Morgul Knights. The Knights look a lot more conservative. I previously made dismounts for my Morgul Knights using the Warriors of the Dead as a base. They're a nice plastic kit of 20 warriors for £26. The simplest thing to do would be to paint them as being alive and call it done. But I wanted them to match my knights more closely, so I press molded to the same shields and helmets. However, if you took my previous suggestion and bought the Argencourt French Infantry, then you could use the more heavily armoured foot knights to Proxy, as they're going spare anyway. Or, why not combine the two suggestions by mixing the French Infantry and the Army of the Dead? The heads of the foot knights could replace the Dead of Dunharrow, as they're clearly very much alive, and some of those spare swords and shields to replace the axes and spears of the Dead of Dunharrow. So no matter which way you did it, you'd have some pretty good looking proxies for your Black Numenoreans. From pirates to Vikings now, we're going to touch on the Dunland Faction. Now we have a bunch of these, but we've had to augment them with some proxies and conversions in the past, as when we started the army, the wild men were not in production. The Dunland kits are all really nice, but they're either metal or forge wheeled resin, so as stated earlier, they can get a bit pricey. The look of the Dunlandings is essentially non-seafaring Vikings, so Viking miniatures are a good place to start. There are tons of these for games like Saga, but my personal pick is for the Victrix Vikings. A really diverse kit that looks really good and is very cost effective. A box of 60 miniatures is £38, that's 63 pence per model. That's considerably cheaper than the official miniatures. But what actually comes in the box? Let's look at the contents. The box comes with all the axes you're ever going to need. Two-handed axes, which could be used for the Huskarls, shields for the warriors. The box even has many lightly armoured troops with swords and axes that could work really well as wild men, as opposed to the more heavily armoured options. But, as far as I can tell, there are no bows. Even though Dunland isn't exactly a faction known for its shooting, if you wanted to get some you would have to kit bash them. Next is the Crubane. Forge World sells them at £25 for 2 flocks of gossiping crows. If you would like some cheaper tattletales though, Reaper Miniatures sells a flock of crows for a £5. And that about wraps things up for Dunland. Now, I wouldn't want to leave this video without mentioning the most expensive miniature in the range. The Desolator of the North himself, Smaug. All £380 of him. He's currently out of stock, so someone seems to be buying him, but many people would either be put off by the price or the sheer size of the lad. Now, Smaug is a bloody great big dragon, so to proxy him, you'll need another bloody great big dragon. I've had a look and I would recommend 2 dragons. The first, I've seen doing the rounds in various forums as a Smaug proxy. This is the dragon miniature from the Time of Legends Joan of Arc. This was a Kickstarter for a board game, and if you pledged, you could add an additional $65 and pick this guy up. He is smaller than Smaug for sure, but he's still very impressive. The streamlined miniature has a much more dynamic pose than our favourite Fire Drake. I think if you put him on the same size base as Smaug, he would make a very fine proxy. The issue is how to get him. Not sure if you can buy him through the Kickstarter still, but I think I recall seeing him on eBay for about £100. But my number one pick by far is this guy, El Terrible from Norba Miniatures. I think he looks great, and in fact they should change the name to El pretty good actually. He is clearly very similar to Smaug. He could even be his little brother, Smig. He is smaller than his big brother, particularly the neck and tail, but I think that improves the pose, as he isn't contorted to fit on the base, like the Desolator himself. The scenic base with the pillars is very similar to Erebor. It's also the same size as the Desolators, so you wouldn't have to worry about buying another one. The last and final bonus is that price tag. He clocks in at £85, so you'd be saving a Dragon's Hoard of around 300 quid. And that'll wrap things up. What do you think of our suggestions this time? Did we miss any out? If so, let us know in the comments and subscribe for more. We've got loads of other Middle-earth content, including scenery builds, conversion guides, so subscribe for more and I'll catch you in the next one.